So good afternoon. It's nice to see all of you, at least virtually. I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but it's nice to see your smiling faces. I'm Julie Broadway. I'm president at the council, and we're delighted that you were able to join us. Today is day 3 of our conference, and we call it the Industry Sector Day. In our National Economic Impact Study, we divide the horse population into 4 sectors. We have racing, we have recreation, we have show and competition, and lastly, we have what we call the traditional working horse sector. And the traditional working horse sector includes horses that are used on ranches and farms, so that's dude ranches and all kinds of farms. And it also includes horses that are used in other roles, such as mounted police and equine assisted services and carriage operators, to name just a few. So we're really delighted this afternoon. This is the first time we've really talked about this sector a whole lot. And we've got a great panel planned. So thank you so much to our panelists for agreeing to join us and to talk a little bit about your particular segment of this sector. So let me do a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll be off and running. So we are using a Zoom platform. We're probably all suffering from Zoom fatigue at this point, and know all these little nuances, but along your toolbar, there is a place that's called chat. And if you have a question for one of our panelists or something you want to follow up on, stick your question in that chat. Depending upon how big the crowd is, we can always go to an open Q&A session at the end if we have time. So that's sort of the logistics of this. We are recording this, and it'll be available for replay later on. So if you have an interest in that, just let me know, and we'll be happy to make sure you get that. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. So first up, I'm going to go in alphabetical order. I got lucky with this. Kathy Ong, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship International. She's been with them since 2014. Prior to that, she was the Executive Director at Little Bit Therapeutic Riding Center in Washington State. Kathy has done an amazing job with equine assisted services all throughout her career. And I am just so fortunate to have worked with her very closely with her. I was on her board of trustees, and then I've been part of her her ambassador program for a number of years. So I'm a huge fan of PATH International and Kathy. So I'm excited about having Kathy. So everybody say hello to Kathy. There you go. Next up, I got Tommy Doyle. I see Tommy's on here somewhere. Show yourself, Tommy, and wave at everybody. Tommy is the general manager of Palmetto Carriage Works. His family has owned and operated that for over 40 years. He employs about 55 people, and they have a working herd of roughly 40 horses. And believe it or not, just in his one area of Charleston, South Carolina, they service 150,000 people a year in the carriage operation business. A lot of times, I think the first encounter that many people have with a horse is when they go somewhere on vacation and they get in one of your carriages, Tommy, and go for a ride and get up close and personal with them. So certainly, so thanks, Tommy. So we're going to round it out with a panelist from the North American Mounted Law Enforcement Unit, and I'm going to butcher your name, Joseph, so help me out. It's Retired Sergeant Joseph Hirsch. Thank you so much.
Hi, buddy.
Prior to retirement, he served in Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for 31 years. In 1996, he was accepted as a collateral assignment with the Mounted Enforcement Detail. And in 2004, he was selected to become the full-time department equestrian supervisor with oversight on all the department's mounted programs. He has done it all in this capacity, and I was most impressed with his work for the Tournament of Roses Parade, because I can say that's probably not an easy assignment for anybody.
You're right.
So I'm very delighted to have him with us. He's on the board for the North American Mounted Commanders Association, which annually is interacting with the mounted law enforcement units across North America. So what a great panel, very diverse, and we're excited to kind of talk about this. So to get us started, what I wanted to do was to ask each of our panelists to take just a few minutes to kind of give the audience a little context. Tell us a little bit about your segment of the industry, maybe sort of a little bit of its scope or its size, maybe a couple of highlights about it. And then I've got a few questions that we'll sort of throw out there, and we'll maybe get the audience engaged in that Q&A too. So Kathy, why don't you kick us off?
All right, thank you, Julie, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's nice to see all of you today. PATH International was formed in 1969 as the North American Writing for the Handicapped Association to promote equine-assisted services for individuals with a variety of challenges and special needs. The scope of our industry, I'm going to quote you some numbers that are pre-pandemic numbers, because of course, because our services, the services our centers offer are in person and tend to be close in person, those numbers dropped significantly last year, and they are just now coming back. But to give you an idea of the scope, we have just under 800 centers all around the world, primarily in the United States. We have almost 4,000 credentialed professionals providing services. And they were serving, 68,000 participants, which also includes 6,700 veterans. And the types of services our centers offer, pardon me, I need to close my box, my email box, so it quits making noise.
Your email's pinging at you.
Yeah, exactly. All right, sorry. The services that are offered by our centers all across the country include mental health services, equine-assisted therapy, so counseling, psychotherapy, as well as PT, OT, and speech. Also equine-assisted learning for organizations and in personal development and leadership, as well as therapeutic riding, therapeutic or adaptive riding. Though any of our centers may offer one or multiple types of services to their participants. The number of I'm sorry, I don't have this number right in front of me. I was looking for the number of equines. Lots of volunteers, over 61,000 volunteers are utilized at centers all across the country. In terms of some highlights, we are involved in ensuring PATH International sets the standards, and we also educate and credential the professionals that provide this service. The standards are something that the credentialed professionals have to uphold, as well as the centers, in order to ensure both effective and safe services are being offered. We have just finished up an initiative to work on terminology for the industry, because that has been a big problem for us. And I don't mean us as in PATH International, I mean us as the industry, because everybody was using so many different types of terms to mean the same thing, or different terms to same term to mean different things, that although we've started to get research that proves that our services work, it's hard to compare research when, one research paper is describing therapeutic riding, but they call it hippotherapy, for example. So it also, we wanted to clarify for the public to know what types of service they are receiving, as well as third-party funders. We've been very pleased with the support from the Hill on funding for equine-assisted psychotherapy for veterans and therapeutic riding for veterans. And we are in the process of developing a training, because we've started to partner with organizations outside the equine industry in order to bring equine-assisted services to a wider audience. And so one of our most recent partners is Columbia University and the Man of War Project, who had developed a research-based curriculum or protocol to treat veterans with PTSD symptoms. And so we are working with them, developing an online training so that our service providers can use a research-based protocol to help veterans all around the country. So those are just some real brief highlights. I think I hit it all.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. I just wanted to pitch out. Therapeutic writing is one of the fastest growing segments of our entire industry right now. And that's only really happened in the last few years. The National Economic Impact Study said that 311.7 million in revenues in a year in the equine assisted services field. And a lot of organizations are really touting horses going to therapeutic riding centers for a second career. So Kathy's constantly being contacted by people trying to offer her some horses but for a second career over there. So this panel is a little bit of compare and contrast. Kathy's on the growing end of the working horse sector. Tommy's up next. Carriage operators have been under scrutiny quite a bit, and several areas in the country have started to close down carriage operations. So Tommy, talk to us about the carriage operating industry and some of the things that are going on for you.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I want to apologize first. We're on vacation this week, and we picked up right next to where they're doing a massive construction project. So if you hear the hammering and the nails, that's coming from next door. So I'll do my best. I think I've closed all the windows, and I think I've got them filtered out at this point. But yeah, the carriage industry, so, I've been doing this 40 years. Actually, my family's been doing it 45 years. I'll be 50 this year, and we started on my 5th birthday. So I'm a lifelong carriage operator, lifelong horseman, but from a very different point of view. I grew up in a neighborhood just outside of Charleston, and only later on in my life have I moved out to a farm where I can keep the animals and enjoy that. But, the carriage industry really is sort of the redheaded stepchild of the horse world. We represent a small percentage of horse owners. There's not the kind of money in our end of the industry that there are in a lot of other segments of the industry. But Julie brought up an excellent point that, if you talk to people, usually a carriage operator in some city is really the first contact that people have with horses. Some people, it's the only contact that they have with horses. And that's to me, that's really important. And that's an important part that we play in the industry. Prior to COVID, my vision and how we did things was a lot different. Now, for the last 13 or 14 months, it's been really more of a survival mode, trying to make sure that we could keep the doors open and keep people excited about riding carriages in the city. And we're doing that. As far as countrywide, the industry over the last couple of years has taken a couple of hits. New York City is always in the spotlight, but it looks like that the carriage operators in New York City are going to survive de Blasio on to the next mayor. Chicago, I believe they're done in Chicago. That was the end. My times are running together, but I think that was about a year ago or so that they closed up shop there in Chicago. We try to stay out of the news. Unfortunately, a lot of times, the only time you hear about carriages is when we're in the news, and it's not for good things. But overall, the progress in the industry, if you consider COVID, has been pretty good. My commitment to, and when I say our, I'm talking about other carriage operators as well, just not in Charleston. We've seen uptick in carriage rides in most big markets. Your big markets would be Charleston being the largest market. It's still a little early to tell whether New York is going again. New Orleans has seen a huge bounce back. A lot of smaller operators are seeing great growth in the funeral segment. A lot of people are using the hearse as part of a send off. So that there's been some growth there. The industry and me in particular, I'm very much committed to the animal welfare, very much committed to realizing that, the animals that we use, this is a second career for most of these horses or mules. And we still embrace that. And, we still like what we do. We've got a new thing in particular in Charleston where they're bringing the police or the mounted police unit back. and they're going to use my barn downtown as a place to stable those horses. So again, going back to anything I can do to promote carriages and promote, I see it, Sergeant, to promote people to come and to see horses and promote interaction between the public that doesn't normally get to see them and those horses.
Thanks, Tommy. I appreciate that. Well, Sergeant, I'll come to you next. And I have to preface this by saying that the American Horse Council traditionally each year pre-COVID did an event down on the National Mall called National Meet a Horse Day. And we would go down on the National Mall. We would invite the Mounted Police Unit in the metropolitan DC area and the Old Guard and the Caisson Platoon to bring horses and come over. And the same experience, Tommy, there. People walking up and down the mall on vacation, families, and suddenly there we are with these horses, and they want to have their picture made, and they want to pet on them, and they want to hear their whole story of this horse's life and where all he'd been and how he got his name, and they get so wrapped up in the whole tradition and history and drama of the whole thing, and they just seem to eat all that up. So we're so excited to have you with us. We know with this civil unrest that we've had earlier in the year, some of the police mounted units have really been under the gun, and they've fought the good fight, but they've also been threatened with defunding. So talk a little bit about your sector. How many total horses are there out there in the mounted world? And what are some of the challenges you guys are facing?
Well, our segment tends to ebb and flow with the sign of the times. And, if you go back to like 1995, there were over 300 mounted units across the United States. And then you jump to 2005 and it went down as low as below 100.
Wow.
And then you jump back to 2015 and some units were being rebuilt. I mean, I've witnessed things that I never thought I'd see. Boston, for instance, lost their mounted unit, and that was politics. And Philadelphia lost theirs, and then they came back. And then San Diego. I mean, it's been a really sad story for some of the stuff. In the case of San Diego, they put those horses on like eBay, and the officers who rode them weren't even able to have a crack at buying them because people who are multimillionaires wound up, buying a horse. I'm not that technologically advanced. I'm going to try to show a couple of pictures real quick.
Okay, hang on. If I can share my screen. I think I've got that feature going. While he's doing that, let me come back and ask Kathy a question. Kathy, so what was one of the biggest misconceptions about your segment and about care and welfare of the horses? When I'm involved with therapeutic riding, I think people often think any horse could do that job, and not all horses have that kind of temperament. And other people are concerned that the types of surroundings those horses are exposed to can be frightening or overwhelming for a horse. So I know there's lots of things to think about, but what do you think is the biggest misconception?
Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions still is that therapeutic riding is pony rides, and that the only horses that are suitable for equine assisted services are really old and, stay at a walk and don't startle at much of anything. And the reality is that our centers need horses that are sound in all three gaits. They need horses that like people and want to interact with people. It's hard work. And our centers recognize that it's hard work. And so the equine care, it's part of our standards of how the equines are cared for, because the equines are central to the services that are provided. And so they need to be cared for really, really well. They need to get exceptional vet care. They need to have turnout. They need to have schooling. They need to get vacations, all of that sort of thing.
Thanks, Kathy. Joe, you got your photo up and it's showing, so that's great. Talk to us about your photo, and then tell us what I asked Kathy is, what do you think is the most common misconception about mounted police horses?
Right here you have a couple of our deputies working the beach, and one of the biggest misconceptions from the world at large, from the public, is that these horses are purchased by the county. A lot of they're not. These are privately owned horses that the deputies use for their job. And many parts across the United States, many units use their own personally owned horses. They're not government owned. Now there are a lot of agencies that do use they purchase horses and they have them stabled, but there is a lot of units in the United States that don't that use their own horses. The other thing that is a big challenge for us is that politicians, city managers, and even police executives they see this as a PR tool, possibly patrolling a park or something. They don't see it as a modern day, that there's a place in 21st century policing for mounted. And I would very much argue that. We actually, Rand Corporation, in conjunction with Oxford University, did a study on the effectiveness of how people interact with mounted law enforcement, as opposed to those folks working in a radio car. And the ability of, there's a search and rescue unit doing their things. It's a very diverse field. There's Rose Parade. You have to have some very well-trained horses to be in those environments. And then we have our civilian volunteers and our reserve deputies being the eyes and ears of law enforcement. Again, using it. And then Steve Owen here in Compton, the city of Compton. Some of these kids have their only interaction with law enforcement, or with a horse, I should say, is through our guys out in the field, working in the field. And then we cover vast rural areas because the county's 4,083 square miles. But I'm talking about the bigger picture. You know, Border Patrol uses over 400 horses. They're probably the largest unit, and they use Mustangs, wild Mustangs that they tame and train to do their job. And then you have big departments like NYPD and LAPD in Chicago, but we all struggle with the defunding of the police and stuff like that. Mounted units tend to get chopped a lot.
Yeah, when we went through the last round of civil unrest here in DC, that was one of the first headlines and the first phone calls I got from some of the newspapers was about different mounted units that looked like they were going to be defunded, and concerns that people had because they saw a horse with a mask over its face and they thought that looked cruel. And actually, we said that's a defense for the horse. You know, if somebody splashes something on its face. So it was quite an interesting conversation. Tommy, talk about what's the most common misperception about carriage horses. I'm certain that you've heard all kinds of things.
Yeah, you know, probably the most common thing that we hear is that once we work them right to the end, and then we sell them to slaughterhouses when it's all over and done. Another one is that they don't ever get breaks. We hook them up in the morning and they work all day and they don't get any breaks. People don't, when they see the animal frothing at the mouth, they assume that it's thirst. Those, I would say probably industry-wide is the slaughter thing, but the working them in the public as we become farther removed from agriculture, as the sergeant said there, a lot of people's only contact with horses is when they see a mounted patrol unit or they come up to one of my horses and, they put human emotions on horses and have never seen, a horse worked before.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, Tommy, I'll go backwards this time. I'll start with Tommy. What could we as an industry do to improve the perception of your sector? I'm thinking about the fact that do we need to do more education? What would you say could we do to dispel those misconceptions so that people are better informed and don't draw those kinds of erroneous conclusions?
That's the $1 million question. So what we've done is we in Charleston, we formed a group, Charleston Cares, and it's made up of 3 carriage operators that we've agreed to be the gold standard in our city. And what we do far exceeds what the city recommendations are. We slam social media as much as we possibly can. Any chance I have to be on the news, I do that. Our competitors, any chance they get onto news, a positive piece. We do fundraisers for our local horse rescues. A couple of us serve on the board of directors for a couple of horse rescues. But it's really an uphill climb, to be truthful. Dr. Lynn said something a few years ago that I just sort of scoffed at. But he told me that, that it's going to be communities that are going to decide what's okay for animal welfare, and we're going to move farther away from fact and science. And my whole business is based on facts and science, not how somebody feels. And so we try to, you try to appeal to that side of people. The way I run my business, every person that comes to ride a carriage, a Palmetto Carriage in Charleston, they come to my facility. They see where the animals sleep. They see where the animals eat. They see where they're bathed. They see where they're hooked up. And so, my personal thing that we do is transparency. If you don't like me, rather than your invisible on the soapbox on Facebook, come to the barn, come see what I do. And then if you don't like me after that, then, that's okay too. But it's really a challenge for our industry, to say the least, because you got people that are making decisions and forming opinions based off of what they read off of Facebook or what they think. And as far as an answer, we try every day. I don't have $1 million answer. Maybe somebody here does.
We'll see. Sergeant, what do you think we could do as an industry to help your particular segment of this group?
Both publicly and privately support mounted law enforcement and the continuation of mounted units. They've actually formed a 503c1, which is the National Mounted Law Enforcement Foundation, that they take donations for and that's for all across the United States, that and Canada. If a mounted unit, one of the things that I learned through my experience is that I've often told units they need to try, if they can. Some agencies won't let them. Like LEP is very effective. They have a foundation that's run by civilian oversight that raises money for them. And so when budgets get tight and they want to cut these guys, they've got another source of funding to draw from. Because, once you do a thing like end Boston's mounted unit, it's awfully hard to start one back up, as you guys well know the cost involved with something like that.
Yeah, and I would guess that it becomes increasingly challenging if you're in a fairly significant city, because you are either having to trailer horses in and out, or if you are fortunate to have a facility that's in the city, you probably own prime property that somebody wants to gobble up just any day.
Yeah, we actually and I have to speak for LA County sheriffs as opposed to the whole, every unit's different. There's such broad, Border Patrol has many facilities across the southern and northern border to house their horses. It's all different. With us, I found, because our county is so large, so vast, bigger than the states of Rhode Island and Delaware combined, that it was actually better for us to have the guys use their houses, trailer them from home, because sometimes our patrol would take 2.5 hours to get to where we're going just to do patrol.
Wow.
So to be decentralized was better for us.
Interesting. Kathy, what about you? What do you think that we as an industry could do to help your particular segment?
Well, I American Horse Council is already doing a lot, and so I would first off say keep doing what you're doing in terms of giving us a voice, giving us a presence, because for starters, it's educating the equine industry on exactly what our services are and what kind of horses are needed, because there's an innate sort of partnership potential with a lot of the different horse organizations, that horses can have a second career as a equine assisted services horse. And I know I started by saying the misconception is old horses, and that is still true. We don't necessarily want the 20-year-olds and above. However, we also don't want the 2-year-olds. The centers are not set up to train the horses. So you know, Sergeant, I know firsthand how wonderful the the horses that are part of the mounted police are trained, because the center I ran back in Washington State, we had a partnership with the mounted police in Seattle. And I believe over the years, we received 2 horses that retired from the mounted police that were just brilliant, because of course nothing startles them. And you know, having somebody with uneven weight and 2 sidewalkers, one on either side of the horse, doesn't faze them. But it's also, we've had retired race horses, because they're not old, they just stopped, you know, their racing days are over. And so we've had retired polo ponies. I'm sorry, they're not ponies. Retired polo horses. Like, you know, usually somewhere around 10 to 13 is a prime age for our centers. And so continuing to educate those within the equine industry about this, partner with your local centers, or, you know, partner with Path International so we can hook you up with local centers, because our centers, it's hard for them to find the horses that can do this work, because it's hard work. So they are always looking for good horses, and it's also a misnomer that they won't ever purchase a horse. Many of the centers have the ability to purchase horses, so it's not they're always looking for donated horses. So that's probably the biggest thing within the industry that I can see a really good partnership possibilities.
Okay.
Off the track racehorses haven't worked real good for us.
Well, I should qualify that. It wasn't straight off the track. They weren't straight off the track. Most of them went to a trainer and like learned to be a jumping horse or learned to be a dressage horse, and then they came to us. So same thing of not wanting a 2-year-old. Yeah, off the track isn't going to work.
Yeah. Great. So I'm asked a couple of questions of our panelists. I'm going to open the floor to see if anybody in our audience has a question you want to ask one of the panelists. So I'll pause for just a minute. Let's see if anybody else comes up with a question.
Julie, I have a question that's a little bit of a more for my own information. So for Kathy and Sergeant Joe, we have an award for thoroughbreds off the track that are doing either therapeutic work or police work. And we do have a few police horses that are just off the track. Wondering if there's any way we can get information about those awards out to the people who would maybe be interested in applying for them every year. We kind of do that mostly by grassroots and word of mouth. So if that's something I can send to you all, or if there's a group that I can send the information to, I'd love to know some more information about it so we can recognize the thoroughbreds that are doing those new careers.
So just for clarification, you have an award that you give out to thoroughbreds. Is that what you were saying? Yeah, absolutely. Send me the information. Okay. Because it's something that we can potentially disseminate out to our centers so they know it's there.
That would be great. Thank you.
You could send it, NMUCA has a website, and you could send it there, and then they'll probably post it for the, we had to do a virtual conference this spring. So of course, last year we had to cancel it and so forth. So we're looking forward to next spring when we get back on track with our annual conference.
Okay, great. I'll check out both of those resources. Thank you, guys.
And Kristen, if you need contacts or emails, just let me know, because I've got all that for everybody on the panel. Hey, well, Bud, how are you today, sir?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. I've just been listening. I have a question for Sarge.
Sure, I know you do.
Here in Pennsylvania, our state police mounted units are using warm bloods. What's your feeling on them compared to the other breeds?
You know, every department is a little different in how they look at the breeds and who works for them in their different capacities. We're pretty generous out our way with what we allow deputies, since they have to buy the horse, to use. They have to be a certain height, and but the big test we have is that you're able to mount from the ground on both sides of the horse. And if you're in a if you're in a big Friesian and you have to get up and get down all day long off the horse, it makes a big difference. My partner, actually the president of the North American Mounted Unit Commanders Association, is the former leader for the Pennsylvania State Police, Wade Crimling. He couldn't be here today.
I know.
But,
I worked with Wade. I know him.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. If I stand next to him, it's like being next to Darth Vader. He's a big dude.
Yes.
But yeah, everybody's got their own, what works best for them. Obviously, with the Border Patrol, Mustangs have worked really well for them. I know in Nashville they were using Tennessee Walkers. It's all in what type of work you're doing and how well the horse functions in an environment. Down in New Orleans, they tend to use very large breeds for crowd management. But we get up and down from the horse all the time, so that doesn't work real well with us.
I'm glad you said that. I would never have thought about that, but after you said it, it makes perfect sense that if you have to get up and down and you've got to do it from the ground, that you've got to have a good companion to make that work.
I've worked as long as 15 hours in the saddle, and I think back to when the cowboys were moving their herds, for months on end, and I thought to myself, my God, how did they do it?
Well, and that's similar to the fact that really tall horses don't work in a therapeutic riding service program, because a sidewalker has to be able to lift their arm and put it over the knee of the participant, and if it's a really tall horse and the sidewalker is just 5'8", it doesn't work. It's too hard. Now, those same horses could work in a ground program, like a mental health program, where you're not worried about hanging on to somebody as they're riding.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, you'd be happy to know that a number of our posse units were doing therapeutic. They brought inner city kids out and spent the day with them, and they really, really enjoyed that.
That's great.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else question for this panel? Anything else that you guys want to share with us? I have a couple more questions on my list. If we have time, we'll get to those. I just don't want to cut anybody else short.
I'm very worried about the what's going on around the country right now with the funding of law enforcement. I mean, the people that go into the job, it's a noble profession, and it's really sad to see what's going on right now. Most of the people I ever worked with went into it for altruistic reasons, and they're getting beat up so bad that we're having massive retirements, and people are not. It's hard enough to get people to go into the job to start off with.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear about that. Yeah. Tommy, do you have something else you wanted to share? I thought I saw your.
Yeah, I was just going to, you were talking about the funding in the municipalities, especially like Charleston, that are so dependent on tourist dollars for their budget. The funding for the police department horses here, is being done all privately. And the horses are being bought by our Visitors Bureau. We're pitching in to help with the boarding, the transportation, with the hope that down the road, the city will be able to pick up the tab. That was interesting that you're saying this. Did I understand that? So some of the police officers own their own horse and wow.
You'd be surprised. So our full-time mounted guys, it's their full-time job, and they had to purchase the horse. And back in the day, they had to purchase the saddle that we dictated they buy, and they had to train on their days off and all that. It changed over time, but I would get calls from the IRS saying the deputy has put on that he had to buy the horse, and I said, yes, that's correct. And they just were shocked that these deputies had to buy the horse to do the job.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because I've worked with the Caisson platoon and the Old Guard, I found it fascinating to learn that the servicemen and women that work for the Old Guard are not horse people at all. They don't want them to have any prior horse experience, because they want to train them the way they want them to do this. Would it be the case that a lot of mounted police officers didn't have prior horse experience and they kind of came into the mounted unit, or vice versa?
I can tell you that my brethren in the LAPD, their trainers prefer to have officers who don't have prior horse experience, because for myself, I've been dealing with horses since I was a little kid, and quite frankly, I had some bad habits, and I really thought I knew a little bit about horses up until I joined the Mounted Enforcement Detail, and boy, did I find out how little I knew. As you folks well know, there's lots of people out there that are passengers on a horse.
Yeah, that part is definitely the case. Anybody else in our audience have a question for these guys? I have, here's one of my questions I'll lob out here. You know, in Kathy's particular case, she's really fortunate that there's some key legislation right now that's going on here in Washington to provide greater funding, especially for veterans and horses. So I'm wondering about, are there other pieces of legislation or regulatory issues that you're facing in your segment that are either really positives or really negatives? So Kathy?
Yeah, so we both already mentioned the really positive one. That one is very exciting. The additional funding has been fantastic for veterans suffering with PTSD symptoms. There's a couple of different types of legislation that's out there that is very worrisome. One is what was referenced in the state legislative update yesterday in Colorado, where what's going on from my armchair, I guess, is there are people that want to protect animals, and most of us fall into that camp. You want to take really good care of the animals. And however, in their desire to protect the animals, some folks are moving forward with legislation that I think has some unintended consequences that actually negatively impacts potentially negatively impacts our sector. And all the sectors, and any horse owner, to be perfectly honest, not just our sector. So that's concerning if that ends up getting legs and gaining traction. The other legislation that is also at the moment is mostly state by state. I think there's been 1 or 2 federal bills proposed, is about certification. Mm-hmm. And again, the intent is honorable, so to speak, in that the people that are proposing this legislation are trying to reduce barriers to jobs, reduce barriers to being able to get a job and go to work. But the way they're going at it is to try to take away certification, not allow people to say they're certified, to not require certification for certain jobs, which are in our minds a real safety issue. I mean, that's not just affecting our sector, obviously, but lots and lots of sectors. But to really reduce the ability for us to certify individuals, so we know that people are being kept safe, and that sort of thing. And in addition, there are bills of that say that somebody who has served a prison sentence, we can't not certify them, which is so those are bills. They haven't passed, but again, unintended consequences. If the reason they went to prison was they were convicted of molesting children or molesting a vulnerable population, to take away our right as a private organization to be able to say this doesn't meet our standards is a little bit scary.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, you've got quite a few different pieces that are coming at you from a couple of different angles. Tommy, I'm going to go back to you. I know this has been more local kind of legislation, but talk a little bit about anything that's out there.
Yeah, it's our industry is one, I won't say 100%, but 99% local things that affect and what go on. It's something that we've lived with forever and probably will live with until I'm not in the carriage business anymore. What we had to change recently, there's a group, and again, I'm speaking specifically of Charleston in this case. There's a group in Charleston that, their mission statement is to put to no more carriages in Charleston. They don't want carriages on the street, and they don't want us anywhere, any shape, form, whatever. And the city wants us to work together to figure out a solution. And, I don't even know, where do you come to the table with a group like that? Where does the conversation start? We go through it. It seems about every year, every two, we'll get thrown, a dozen or so new ordinances, and we try to go through them and what can we possibly live with. And we just finished that up this week, and we're still fighting over it. But basically what'll come out of this is no more school groups on the carriages, because they don't want too many kids on one carriage. And then no riding at night unless you give the city 48 hours notice. And, riding at night, that's always been a popular thing in most cities, not just Charleston, but it's a walk-up thing. Hey, we're out to dinner. Why don't we jump on a carriage? It's not something you plan 48 hours ahead of time. It's not done yet. Well, we've got several more of these meetings to go to, but that's what the big push here locally is. But every city Charleston is not unique when it comes to regulating horses and carriages in the city. I just happen to be on the radar right now.
Yeah. A quick side note for Tommy. I think I've told you this story, Tommy, but my husband proposed to me on a carriage in Central Park in New York City. So
hey, all right.
I have this real connection with your statement of it. Anyway, so Sergeant, talk to us a little bit about anything you know of, and it may be like Tommy, it may be more local than federal. Any kind of legislation that we should be mindful of that's going to positively or negatively impact your particular segment?
Legislation wise, I don't know any off the top of my head right now that's in the works. Our biggest challenge has to do with just abolishing units, defunding the police. And the thing is that a lot of people just don't understand that, like for instance, as you can imagine, there's a lot of crowd management things going on in the last year. When you get down to the brass tacks though, an officer, a trained officer on a trained horse in a trained unit is worth 12 officers on the ground, just one of them. And you get the most amount of compliance with the least amount of force. And when city executives and politicians, city managers and so forth, police executives, when they understand that reality, then they embrace it, because we're always getting, law enforcement's always getting sued. Again, it's a lot. My horse, my partner Scout, got a bottle to the face at an NBA final championship riot, And fortunately, he had his shield on, and he kept trucking like nothing happened. But if he had been injured, it actually would have turned the tables. They made it out like, oh, these people are just celebrating the NBA win. But once they hurt a horse, a police horse, the tables turn in the way people look at that.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, and then we'll sort of start to close up. You know, one of the biggest roles that the American Horse Council plays is going up on the Hill, going into those congressional offices and educating our senators and our House of Representatives members about our industry. Most of them are not horse people. I think right now, Brian's on here. Brian, I think we have one congressional member who is a veterinarian. So when we get to talking about some of these issues and some of these challenges, it's us trying to help them understand. When Santa Anita was having some trouble out at the track, you know, right, trying to explain that there's a lot of factors involved. You know, you look at the turf versus the dirt, you know, just trying to help them put their head around all of the components that go into thinking about this industry. Brian, did you want to say a few words? How would you characterize the makeup of the Congress right now for our industry?
Well, you're right about veterinarians. We used to have two, and now there are one. We had Congressman Yoho, he retired, so it's all up to Kurt Schrader to carry that mantle in the House. We do have a Congressional Horse Caucus. That's about 22 members. I think it's declined a little bit. Some of those members are actually horse people, but the common denominator there is they have a racetrack or other facility in their district that is equestrian in nature. And I would say maybe 1 in 10 offices we visit have a staffer or a member who rides, who's a horse person.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that. So I say all that to say to the three of you, let us know how we can help you and how we can inform people up on the Hill about some of the challenges that you're facing, and we'll be happy to work on that. I guess we'll close with this last question I have on here. Kathy, what would be the one thing you'd like this audience to take away from this panel discussion?
Well, I guess I would like this audience to take away a better understanding of all three of our pieces of the sector: equine assisted services, the mounted police, and the carriage operators. I think it's helpful for all of us to understand the different parts of this industry. And what I'd like them to take away from equine assisted services in particular is this idea that our centers need horses, well-trained and healthy horses. And so if there are opportunities to partner up, to find ways to connect with our centers to help them in that matter, I would love to hear about it. We did pre-pandemic, we were talking to the BLM and about, was there a way to partner up with Mustangs? That's still on the table. The challenge, of course, is, you know, we're back to talking 2-year-olds, and not that the Mustangs are 2, but in terms of not being trained. So just any of you thinking about whether you have horses that are well trained and healthy, that might make good partners for our therapeutic riding centers.
Thanks, Kathy. Tommy, what you want the audience to take away?
You know, Julie, just with what you led off with, you know, this segment of the industry, I think arguably probably gives the general public the greatest opportunity to come in contact with animals and with horses. And we talk about, or with horses, you know, we talk about the young people being the future and the next generation. Well, I think this segment of the industry is tremendously important to that, the interaction that we have. And, you know, as far as my business in particular, you know, the carriage operators aren't monsters that we're painted to be, you know, people out there making a living. And, you know, my business and most carriage businesses have a great track record of doing a good and a right thing. And what I'd love for everybody to do is come to Charleston and take a carriage tour. That's what I really want people to take away from this.
That sounds like a good plan, Tommy. I think it's so fascinating, Tommy. Your particular segment of combines the hospitality industry with the horse industry. And I don't think people really recognize, they think you as a horse person, but really you're providing hospitality, almost to a certain extent, sort of entertainment, if you will, for people. It's all about that relationship and that experience.
You're 100% right. And in Charleston, the number one thing to do in the city, the carriage tour.
There you go.
Hey, Tommy.
Yes.
Tommy, I want you to know that I was on active duty with the Air Force after 9/11 and got married in my mess dress out in Riverside, California at the Mission Inn.
Yep.
And my wife wanted for us to do it in a carriage. So we were horse-drawn carriage right after we received our nuptials.
Hey, that's great to hear.
We love that story. So, Sergeant, what would you like the group to take away from this conversation?
Two things: that there is a place for mounted officers in the 21st century. I think it's particularly with the way people are looking. Law enforcement officers are a slice of humanity. You have some that are very friendly, some that are more serious, but they're all the vast majority go into it for noble reasons, and the villainization of some of these folks is just, it's not fair. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah. Somebody's just posted in the chat that our neighbors have draft horses and they do wagon rides around the Denver area. So lots of opportunities. Well, I really want to thank the panel for this. I'd love for you guys to think a little bit about, I'd like to continue to have a little panel like this at subsequent conferences. So think a little bit about topics or different things that we could talk about on this panel. I see some faces out there. Does anybody else want to say anything before we wrap up, or anybody else got a question for the group before we close?
Yeah, I'd like to make one quick comment here to close out. I had an email from my friends over at the Michigan Horse Council, and in May, they had on May 17th, in the evening, they had a virtual equine coffee hour. And the subject of their May discussion was to talk about mounted police. So the Michigan Horse Council has taken one step to, I think, bring the work that you folks do in the mounted patrol to light. I know I shared it with some of my county patrol horse friends here in Minnesota, and I know they had planned to attend. And Jean Ligon says that there is a mounted patrol dialogue from that discussion that she can send out. So if any of you want to get a hold of Jean, that is available apparently.
That's
I just
great.
talked to her on the phone.
And again, I would offer, Sergeant, if you guys have some collateral or anything you want us to circulate to sort of make your case and sort of rally the troops, we could circulate that through our network of state horse councils and other groups, because they're the real boots on the ground in these individual communities that could make a difference. So if there's anything we can do, Tommy, that's also very applicable to you. Kathy, I know you've got some really great contacts in all your little communities, but we'll help you in any way we can with that. Anybody else, anything you want to say before we wrap up? My watch says 4:59, so I've got a minute left.
I feel honored that you guys asked me to be here, and I appreciate coming before you.
We really appreciate it. What'd you say, Bud?
Julie, this is Bud. Something for your other states to think about. In Pennsylvania, we have a mounted state police unit, and we take and invite them to almost any activity we have, and they do presentations on training of the horses, doing everything. They're at our farm show, that are our Ag Progress Days. Anything we can, we bring those guys in. And they're actually a hit because the kids love them. And kids are petting them. And that's sometimes the first chance a kid has to be involved with both a cop and a horse. So don't overlook that. Use them as much as you can in public relations.
That's a great segue there, Bud. Well, thank you all again for your time this afternoon and for your attention and contributions to this conversation. And hope you'll join us tomorrow. Day 4 of our conference is our welfare day. So we'll kick it off with Cliff. Hey, Cliff, wave over there, everybody. Cliff's going to kick it off with the Equine Welfare Committee. And then we're going to have the United Horse Coalition, which is our work that we do for horses that are at risk or in transition. We're going to have a great presentation there, and she's got some special guests Dr. Stacy Boswell is going to be speaking, and she's got a fabulous presentation planned. So feel free to join us for any of that you'd like tomorrow. And then Friday is our Industry Initiative Day, and we got some exciting stuff going on there. We've got some new work going on by the Marketing Alliance to better market the industry. We're going to hear from our Youth Engagement Task Force. They're doing some really cool stuff, and we're partnering with the National Homeschooling Association on that. We're going to hear from our Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Task Force and some of the work that they're doing to help in some of the underrepresented areas and that kind of thing. And then I'm going to wrap up with a summary about the economic impact study for 2022. So I'll give you an update on all that. So join us tomorrow and or Friday. We start at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye, guys.